This is 666 Fifth Avenue, just blocks away from MSNBC's headquarters in New York. An aging 41-floor skyscraper that Trump's son-in-law and top advisor, Jared Kushner, bought in 2007 for $1.8 billion. Now, experts said he overpaid, and that was before the Great Recession dropped the property's value by a lot. And now the Kushner family real estate business is strapped with a $1.2 billion mortgage with escalating interest rates, not enough tenants to cover the interest payments, and a bill that comes due in 18 months. That may explain why Kushner has been on a globe-trotting money hunt. The problem is, Kushner's role in the White House has made 666 Fifth Avenue toxic to potential investors, according to the Chicago Tribune. You might say the property is bedeviling him. Joining me now is Tim O'Brien, MSNBC contributor and author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being the Donald. Tim, we brought you on to talk about Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, but I cannot resist asking you about his tweet storm this morning. Donald Trump went on a little bit of a tear. We're going to get into it later in the show. What is this about? A train with a hat? A gif of Donald Trump hitting a golf ball and hitting Hillary Clinton with it. What's going on in his head, do you think?
Well, you have to wonder what the president ate for dinner or maybe had for breakfast when this kind of thing happens. Joy, it's befuddling. It is not presidential. He's sort of gestured this morning at Rocket Man in North Korea. He's made fun of his former opponent in the general election. And all of it actually, I think, it's a little bit beneath the dignity of the office. But we've gotten used to this with him to a certain extent, although in the last couple of weeks, he's shown more restraint on Twitter. There's been an argument out there that was because of Kelly's influence in the White House and that he had helped magically, discipline the president. But I think, as we find time and time again, this isn't a president who's easily disciplined.
Yeah, there's something very juvenile about it, but it has prompted us here at the AM Joy Show to be singing Rocket Man pretty much all morning, which is always a treat. Love Elton John. All right, well, let's talk about Jared Kushner for just a second, because obviously Donald Trump has put a lot of trust in Jared Kushner. He has him globe-trotting around the world, but this does dovetail with what we've called here a money hunt. And here's just some of the business dealings that Jared Kushner has attempted to sort of gin up. He's met with the former Prime Minister of Qatar, Hamid bin Jassim Al Thani, and then when that didn't work out, suddenly Qatar fell off the favorable list. He's met with China's Anbang Insurance Group, trying to get them to invest in 666 Fifth Avenue. He's met with top executives at Veneshcom Bank, which is, of course, the sanctioned Russian bank. We don't know, and it was under sanctions. We're still trying to unfold that. Do you get the sense that Donald Trump is allowing Jared Kushner to go around the world negotiating for the United States in part as a way to allow him to also try to get investors for his business?
Well, we'll have to ultimately find out the answer to that question, I think, through the Mueller investigation. We still don't know a lot about what the communication was between the president and his son-in-law. What we do know, and as you've pointed out this morning, is there's a real danger of possible quid pro quos here in which the president's son-in-law is using the family's newly found power during the transition period before Trump gets sworn in as president to feather their nest. And in the Kushner's case, it's not merely trying to make money, it's trying to actually prevent a financial disaster from enwrapping the entire family. 666 Fifth Avenue was an enormous mistake by Jared Kushner. He did overpay for it. He was able to refinance the debt in 2007 that gave him about a decade or so of breathing room before the Piper came calling. Fortunately for him, an intervening event happened before the 10-year clock ran out. His father-in-law became president. And in the transition period, we know that Kushner already tried to arrange a refinancing with Chinese investors. When my colleagues at Bloomberg brought some daylight onto those negotiations, they blew up. And there was a real issue then as to whether or not his conversations with the Chinese would end up compromising foreign policy or trade agreements with the Chinese. You have exactly the same issue with the Russians, with the added magic here, of course, that Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign solicited Russian involvement in the U.S. elections willy-nilly and irresponsibly.
Yeah, indeed. Well, stay right there, Tim. I want to keep you around, but I want to also bring in our panel. Scott Dworkin, senior advisor to the Democratic Coalition Against Trump. Nayyera Haq, former senior advisor at the State Department and former White House senior director and political strategist for Fernand Amandi. Thank you guys all for being here. And Scott, I want to go to you on this same question of Jared Kushner. This was Jared Kushner back in July 24th. Speaking, which is something he doesn't do a lot in public, and talking about Russia.
I did not collude with Russia, nor do I know of anyone else in the campaign who did so. I had no improper contacts. I have not relied on Russian funds for my businesses. And I have been fully transparent in providing all requested information.
Scott, you do a lot of digging about Jared Kushner and his business dealings in Russia. Is any of that true?
No. He colluded with Russia. I think that's been proven at this point. But whether or not it was criminal, it comes to the context of the campaign.
Well, when you say he colluded with Russia, what do you mean?
I think that he partnered with Russia in an effort to undermine the U.S. election.
And what specifically would he have done to do that?
Running the online operation program with Russia in tandem, and targeting things on Facebook and on Twitter to try and undermine the election.
So the idea, of course, we know that, and none of this has obviously been proven by Bob Mueller yet. He's still investigating it. But the idea is that Jared was actually in charge of the online operation for the Trump campaign. And so the question would be, could the Russians have figured out on their own, without someone on the American side saying, no, target this state, target this kind of voters, and giving them some metrics? Is that what you're getting at?
Exactly.
And Nayyera, the other piece of the Kushner puzzle is this question. He said also he had no improper contacts, which we do know that he had that meeting, a couple of meetings. There's the one with the National Bank that has come out, that meeting in Trump Tower with Donald Jr. and others and many Russians. It's not clear what we don't know what they talked about in those meetings, but is there at least a circumstantial case here that some of what these meetings were about was 666 Fifth Avenue?
This is generally why you don't mix family politics and business, right? This is part of what the Emoluments Clause was going at, because we don't want the United States, the presidency, to be operating the way these kleptocracies operate in Russia and elsewhere around the world. So this is already problematic for us culturally in the United States, and that's essentially what the Mueller investigation is getting into. And they're getting into it in partnership with the State Attorney General of New York, and that's key, particularly when we talk about the 666 building, because that's New York real estate issues, which then allows a state crimes or potentially the state challenges to be coming if a federal investigation on, say, Manafort gets pardoned by Donald Trump as president. The president does not have any pardoning authority against a case that's brought at the state level. So Jared Kushner could still end up being criminally liable for these contacts with Russia in a way his father-in-law cannot intervene.
And just to stay with you just for a moment, having worked at the State Department, when you say the way that these kleptocracies operate, what do you mean by that in terms of what is similar about the way that Kushner is operating in sort of these two tracks where he's doing this diplomacy and also sort of hunting for investors?
It's the quid pro quo. Oh, I'm here to talk about policy with foreign leaders, and I will give you what you want, but I also am looking for something I want in terms of money or financial dealings. And it really does end up being a diplomatic way of asking for a bribe.
Yeah, and Fernand, you know, the political sort of peril that Donald Trump is in here is this is family, right? Jared Kushner is not just an advisor he can easily just distance himself from. He could fire him, but he'd still be family. And that exposure makes it a little difficult and dicey for Donald Trump. Do you get the sense, just from observing him over this period of time, that Trump is going to have his loyalty to Jared Kushner outweigh the sense that Kushner is a risk to his presidency?
Well, I think he'll show Jared the same loyalty he showed to his two wives, mother of his children. He cheated on them both. He dumped them both. And I think that's why Mueller, who's a very smart guy, Joy, you see the noose and the case tightening around Jared Kushner. I think, you know, in Godfather terms, Trump likes to present Jared Kushner as this slick, smooth, Tom Hagen-esque consigliere, when Mueller, I think, sees him more as a combination between idiot son Fredo and treacherous son-in-law Carlo, who you remember got whacked at the end. So I think more and more you see the money laundering case brought in. You see the same ability to try and have vulnerability with Kushner over the 666 building that perhaps the Russians saw, perhaps even asked his father-in-law for help for. I think Mueller sees that as well, and I think he's trying to target Kushner with the idea of getting him to flip, because Trump will eventually dump him, as some of the leaks have already suggested.
And Tim, same question to you. I mean, you've covered Trump a long time. How loyal is he, in your view, to Jared Kushner?
Well, I don't think Donald Trump is loyal to anyone ultimately but himself. His family has often been an exception to that rule. And clearly in the White House, Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are first among equals. But that all predates, again, Robert Mueller's investigation. And Jared Kushner, there's no question that Jared Kushner is an immense liability to the president in the course of this investigation. We know from the Wall Street Journal's reporting that Trump's own attorneys considered essentially ejecting Kushner from the White House a few months ago because of concerns that he was a legal liability. I think that's going to continue to be a problem. The testimony that you referenced earlier of Kushner standing in front of the White House saying there was no collusion or no business deals discussed. Let's remember at one of his meetings with Russian bankers that was brokered by the Russian ambassador, Michael Flynn attended that meeting with him. And if Michael Flynn was under surveillance, either through email or telephone contacts, during that time, investigators are going to have some information about what took place at those meetings via Flynn that may run contrary to what Kushner told Congress.
And Scott, I mean, there do seem to be these, multiple points of contact with Russians, Russian businesses, Russian investors. Is that as true for Jared Kushner as it seems to be true for Donald Trump?
In some cases, it seems to be more true for Kushner to have these sort of connections. And it seems that some of his best friends are Russians. He vacations in Russia with Ivanka. He definitely has worked with Russian oligarchs. But at the end of the day, this guy is a billionaire. He's not a guy that doesn't have lawyers look at every single thing that he's ever done. So when you submit paperwork that leaves out over 100 foreign contacts and meetings, there's something sinister there.
Yeah, and Naira, obviously that's the sort of it's the inescapable problem they have, is that he actually did fill out these forms and leave out over 100 contacts.
And it is difficult to forget that aspect of having met that many foreign officials. And if anything, that should point to the first step being revoking a security clearance, because he is sitting in the West Wing right now with active access to high intelligence, and then can turn around and hand it off to people so that he can potentially get money for his building.
And Fernand, you talked to some of the Republican members of Congress from down there in Florida. Why is there not a call for Jared Kushner to lose his security clearance?
I mean, I think there has been in certain circles, but by and large, you got to remember, Kushner, in many respects, is the ultimate gatekeeper in the White House. Trump has basically made him and presented him as this wonderkind who was going to solve every problem in the administration, the center of the spoke of the wheel, and that's why I think all aspects keep coming back to him. But Joel, if I could, I'd like to come back and remind the viewers of a really interesting development in the Mueller case here. It seems more and more that this is being set up as a showdown to target two: Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner. Now we see the noose again tightening around Kushner. And this speaks to me about a focus here to try and get one to flip on the other. And that's why this question that you asked earlier, the right question, where are Trump's loyalties here? I think at the end of the day, blood's going to be thicker than water, and you're going to see Donald Trump Jr. try and eventually turn on Kushner unless Mueller gets to him first.
The plot thickens, and we will definitely be watching a great panel. Thank you guys. Tim O'Brien, Scott Dworkin, Naira Haq, Fernand Amandi. Thank you all, friends. Have a great rest of the day. All right, and up next, the great Katie Tur will be here to tell us what it was like on the trail with Trump. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.